She counted the headlights. Every pair of beams that swept across the rain-slicked window of Rosie's diner made Ellie Mercer pull her sleeves a little further down her wrists. 17 years old, $43 and a cracked phone in her pocket. Outside, Black Hollow, Montana was drowning in freezing rain, and nobody in this town had ever cared enough to notice. The man at the counter hadn't spoken in 20 minutes, battle-scarred. Still, eyes that had seen the kind of dark that doesn't wash off. He noticed. And when 15 Harleys roared out of the storm and surrounded that diner like a wall of iron and thunder, they weren't there to threaten anyone. They were there because one broken man asked one quiet question and everything changed. If you've ever felt invisible, stay until the end, like this video. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching from. This one's for every soul who needed someone to show up. The rain had been falling since Tuesday. By Thursday night, it had turned mean. The kind of cold, slanting Montana rain that didn't come straight down but drove sideways off the Beartooth Range and found every gap in every collar, every crack in every window frame. Black Hollow sat at the bottom of a valley that collected weather the way other towns collected debt, which was to say, endlessly, without mercy, and with absolutely no plan for what to do with it all. Rosie's diner occupied a crumbling corner lot at the junction of Route 9 and a county road that didn't have a name on any current map. The sign out front had lost its apostrophe sometime in the late 90s, and nobody had bothered to fix it. 3 of the 6 stools at the counter were wobbly. The coffee was genuinely terrible. The heat came from a single propane unit bolted to the wall near the register that cycled on and off with a sound like an old man clearing his throat, and the fluorescent tube above the pie case flickered every 45 seconds with the reliability of a metronome nobody had asked for. Ellie Mercer sat in the corner booth with her back to the wall. She'd chosen it deliberately. The angle gave her a clear sightline to the parking lot, to the door, and to the pass-through window where a cook named Dennis occasionally appeared to check on things before disappearing again into the back. Ellie had been running this calculation for 3 years now. Back to the wall, eyes on the exit. Wait on your feet even when you're sitting down. You practiced it so many times it stopped feeling like survival and started feeling like just the way a body naturally arranged itself in space, the way other girls arrange their hair or their lipstick. She was 17 years old and she was very, very tired. The hot chocolate in front of her had gone cold. She'd ordered it 40 minutes ago because it was the cheapest thing on the menu that came in a mug, and the mug meant warmth against her palms. And warmth was the only thing she'd been able to think clearly about since she'd walked 4 miles through the rain with nothing but a canvas bag over one shoulder and the specific quiet numbness that settles into a person's chest when they've made a decision they can't take back. She wasn't going home tonight. That was the decision. Simple to state. Incomprehensibly complicated to actually live inside of, because going home meant Wade, and Wade tonight had been... Her mind skipped over the word she'd assigned to what he'd done. Skipped over it the way you'd skip over a loose board in a floor you'd learn to navigate in the dark. She pulled her sleeve down over her left wrist. The right sleeve she'd already checked twice in the bathroom mirror. Both sleeves of the flannel were long enough. She'd been strategic about the flannel. Outside, a pair of headlights swept across the window and her whole body flinched, shoulders dropping, chin pulling in, the automatic response so deeply grooved into her nervous system now that she didn't even feel it as a choice. Just physics. Stimulus. Response. Something approaches. Something in you collapses inward like a structure bracing for impact. The headlights belonged to a county pickup that blew through the intersection without slowing. Ellie let out a breath she hadn't consciously taken in. Dennis appeared in the pass-through. "You doing okay over there, hun?" He was in his 50s, thick around the middle, with a mustache that had been out of style since before she was born, and eyes that were kind in the uncomplicated way of someone who had never had to work at it. "Fine," she said. "I'm fine." He looked at her for a beat. The specific look of someone who suspects the word fine is doing a lot of heavy lifting, and then he nodded and disappeared again. She was grateful for that. She didn't want questions. Questions led to answers, and answers led to phone calls, and phone calls led to the kind of help that wasn't actually help, that was just a different kind of trap with official paperwork attached. She'd tried official paperwork. Twice. Once when she was 14, once when she was 15. Both times, the same deputy had responded. Both times, the deputy had spoken with Wade in the driveway for approximately 12 minutes before coming back to the door and telling Ellie that family disputes were complicated and that it sounded like things were really difficult at home, and that maybe she should try talking to a school counselor. The first time, she'd believed him. The second time, she'd watched the deputy's truck pull away, and then she'd gone to her room and she'd understood something that took up no space at all in the body but weighed approximately 1,000 pounds. Nobody was coming. Not from that direction. Maybe not from any direction. She was on her own. She pulled her phone out. 43% battery. 3 contacts she could actually call at this hour. Her friend Jade, who was 16 and scared of her own shadow, and who would immediately call her mother, who would immediately call Wade. Her Aunt Patricia, who lived 6 hours south in Billings, and who had no idea about any of this, who Ellie had spent 3 years protecting from the full weight of the truth, because Patricia was good and soft, and the thought of dropping this into her life felt like throwing a rock through a window in a room where someone was sleeping. And there was the crisis line number her school counselor had given her the previous spring, printed on a laminated card, which she'd memorized and then lost somewhere, and which she could not bring herself to call because calling it meant saying the words out loud, and saying the words out loud made them real in a way that her body was not currently prepared to survive. She set the phone face down on the table. The bell above the door chimed. She looked up. He was tall, not in the way that announced itself, not in the way of athletes or men who needed you to know it, but in the way of someone who had grown into a frame that life had then proceeded to do significant damage to, and who had learned to carry both the height and the damage without calling attention to either. He was maybe mid-30s, though something about him suggested the years hadn't moved at a regular pace. He wore a leather jacket that was not new, the kind of jacket that had been through weather and distance, and hadn't been treated gently and didn't ask to be. On the back, she caught a flash of a patch before he turned, something angular, something with wings, iron-colored, before he settled onto a stool at the counter with the economy of movement of someone who didn't waste energy on anything non-essential. He nodded at Dennis, who appeared without being called. Coffee. That's all? That's all. Dennis poured. The man wrapped both hands around the mug and stared into it with the specific stillness of someone who was not relaxing but was instead doing something that looked like relaxing from the outside while being entirely different on the inside. Ellie had spent years developing the ability to read that particular stillness in other people because it was important, always, to know whether the stillness meant safe or meant dangerous. She watched him for 4 minutes without him looking at her once. He drank his coffee. He didn't check his phone. He didn't look around the diner with the restless scan of someone trying to establish dominance over a space. He just sat with the mug and whatever was in his head, which appeared to be considerable, and he let the terrible coffee do whatever terrible coffee does for people who've decided it's what they're drinking tonight. She had almost turned back to her own cold hot chocolate when she shifted her weight in the booth and her sleeve slid. Just an inch. Just the way fabric moves when you move, the small, inevitable adjustment of cloth over skin. She caught it immediately and pulled it back down, and when she looked up, the man at the counter had turned his head exactly enough to see what she was doing. Not enough to be obvious, just enough. His eyes met hers for maybe 2 seconds. His face didn't change. He didn't recoil, and he didn't lean forward, and he didn't do the thing people sometimes did when they caught a glimpse of something they weren't supposed to see, which was to immediately fill the air with noise and concern as a way of processing their own discomfort rather than actually attending to the person in front of them. He just looked at her, and then he looked back at his coffee, and then after a moment he set the mug down, turned slightly on his stool, and said, in a voice that was quiet enough that Dennis couldn't have heard it from the back, "Are you safe tonight?" Not what happened. Not, "Oh my God, are you okay?" Not the cascading interrogation of shock and pity and uncomfortable curiosity that she'd been afraid of since she was 14 and had first understood she was afraid of it. Just the one question. The only question that had ever mattered. The one that cut straight through every layer of deflection and performance and careful sleeve management and landed directly in the middle of the thing she had been sitting with alone for 3 years. Ellie stared at him, her throat tightened in the specific way that presaged crying, which she refused to do. She had a rule about crying in public. The rule was no. I don't know you, she said. No, he agreed. That's not an answer to a question from a stranger. No, he said again, and he didn't push it. He just waited. And the waiting was the most disarming thing anyone had done to her in longer than she could calculate, because waiting communicated something that urgency and concern and institutional intervention had never managed to communicate, which was, I am not going anywhere. You don't have to perform safety for me. I will sit here until you're ready. She looked at the table. She looked at her phone. She looked at the rain on the window and the dark parking lot beyond it, and the county road that eventually led back to the farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge, where Wade Mercer was very likely in his chair with a glass of something amber-colored, working himself into a particular mood that she had learned over 6 years to predict with the accuracy of a barometer. No, she said quietly. I'm not safe tonight. The man at the counter nodded once, like she'd confirmed something he'd already calculated, which she suspected he had. Okay, he said. He pulled out his phone. Not frantically, not with the performance of someone taking dramatic action, just the same way he did everything, with a kind of deliberate calm that suggested the machinery inside him was running at full capacity without making any noise about it. He typed something, put the phone away, picked up his coffee again. What did you just do? She asked. Let some people know where I am. She felt the first real spike of alarm. What people? My family, he said. Something about the way he said it, not the word itself, but the particular weight he put on it. The slight pause before it that suggested the word was both accurate and insufficient made Ellie study him more carefully. The jacket, the patch, the quality of stillness that wasn't peace, but was something that had been worked toward. The way a scar that's healed properly isn't the same as undamaged skin, but is in some ways more durable. You're a biker, she said. Yes. Iron Saints. Yes. She'd heard the name. Everyone in Black Hollow had heard the name, in the way you heard things in a small town, fragments, rumors, the way reputation preceded actual knowledge like weather moving ahead of a storm system. She'd heard Wade use the name, which meant she'd heard it spoken with contempt and a particular kind of nervousness that Wade reserved for things he didn't fully control. She filed that away. Are you going to try to help me, she said, or are you going to call someone official? The pause he took before answering was honest. That was what she noticed. He didn't rush the reassurance. I'm going to ask you what you need, he said, and then I'm going to try to help you get it. What if what I need is just to sit here for another hour? Then we sit here for another hour. Outside, the rain had intensified. It hit the window in waves now, each gust rattling the frame in its casing, and the propane heater cycled on with its old man clearing throat sound and filled the diner with a wave of dry warmth that smelled faintly of burning dust. Ellie pulled her sleeves straight. She looked at the man at the counter, at the scar that bisected his left eyebrow, at the way his hands around the mug were large and rough-knuckled but completely still, at the 1,000-yard quality of his gaze when it wasn't focused on her, like a man watching a perimeter that only he could see. What's your name? She asked. Ryder. Ellie, she said. She didn't offer the last name. He nodded. He didn't ask for it. She wasn't sure how much time passed. The rain, the flickering light above the pie case, Dennis reappearing once to warm up a mug she didn't ask for, and then disappearing again. The propane heater cycling, the specific quality of silence that existed between two people who had both decided, for different reasons, that the night required patience. She was watching the parking lot out of habit when the first headlight appeared. Not a car, something lower. A single beam, and then beside it another, and then she started counting without meaning to, the way she counted everything now, an automatic inventory of anything that might constitute a threat. 4, 5, 6 sets of lights materializing out of the rain, and then more behind those. And the sound arrived a half second after the lights, the way thunder follows lightning, except this wasn't thunder. This was engines. Multiple engines, a sound that was less like traffic and more like weather itself, low and rolling and enormous, filling the valley the way the rain had been filling it for 3 days. She was on her feet before she'd made the decision to stand. Her bag was in her hand. Her heart was doing something with her ribcage that she didn't have a clinical term for. Ryder, it's okay. He was already turned toward the window, watching the lights resolve into shapes. Motorcycles, a line of them pulling into the parking lot in formation, engines dropping from thunder to a rough idle, and then one by one, cutting out. The silence that followed was not quiet. It was the silence of something very large holding very still. How many? She started. 15, he said, like he'd already counted. She stared at him. You texted 15 people. I texted one person. He set down his coffee. 15 people showed up. The door opened. The man who came in first was enormous in a way that immediately recalibrated the available space in the diner. Not fat, built, but not in the way of someone who worked at it, in the way of someone who had spent years doing physical work that had simply accumulated in the body as mass and density. He was in his late 40s, dark-bearded, with a face that had been rearranged by something at some point, a nose that had been broken and hadn't been set professionally, and eyes that were alert in the way of someone whose alertness had never been optional. His jacket matched Ryder's. The patch on the back was the same angular wing design. Below the main patch, a second one, Sergeant at Arms. He looked at Ryder. He looked at Ellie. He didn't look at Ellie the way most men looked at her, which was to say he didn't look at her with the particular kind of assessment that made her want to step backward. He looked at her the way you'd look at a situation you'd been briefed on and were now verifying with your own eyes. This her? He said to Ryder. Yeah, Ryder said. The big man nodded. He turned to Ellie. I'm Bull. You don't have to be scared of us. I'm not scared, she said, which was approximately 40% true. Bull absorbed this without commenting on the approximate nature of it. Good, he said. Cold out there. You want something to eat? Dennis? He said this toward the pass-through without raising his voice particularly, and Dennis appeared with the immediate obedience of someone who had a long and productive history with Bull. Feed the kid. Whatever she wants. Put it on the tab. I'm not, Ellie started. You haven't eaten since this morning, Ryder said. She stopped. She hadn't told him that. She stared at him. How do you... The hot chocolate's been sitting there cold for almost an hour, and you haven't touched it, he said. And the way you looked at the pie case when you first sat down. He shrugged, the gesture minimal, almost apologetic. I pay attention. Outside, the other 13 bikers had not come in. Through the window, she could see them. Some leaning against their bikes, some standing in loose clusters at the edges of the parking lot, jackets glistening with rain, faces turned outward toward the road and the darkness beyond it, away from the diner, away from her. Standing the way men stood when they were keeping watch. When they had been asked to keep watch and had decided, without discussing it among themselves, that this was something worth doing. The county road was empty. The rain kept falling. Ellie sat back down. She didn't know why. Some calculation in her body that she couldn't fully articulate had decided, without asking the rest of her, that the threat had shifted, that whatever danger existed tonight existed out there, and that the people now positioned between her and out there were not the source of it. Dennis put a plate in front of her, a cheeseburger, fries, a new hot chocolate that was actually hot. She hadn't ordered any of it, and she didn't argue. She ate. Ryder went back to his coffee and didn't watch her do it, which was another thing she filed away as significant. Most people, when they were being careful with her, were careful in a way that required her to perform gratitude for their carefulness. This man just drank his terrible coffee and stared at some middle distance and allowed her to eat a cheeseburger in the corner of a diner in the rain without making it into anything. Ryder, Bull said, quietly enough, settling onto the stool beside him. We got a problem. What kind? The kind that has a name. Bull kept his voice below the ambient sound of the heater and the rain. Terrence Hod. Ryder didn't visibly react. He's watching the road? Parked at the Sunoco, half a mile east, just sitting. There was a pause. That's Wade's cousin, Ryder said. Yeah. So he knows she's gone already. Looks like. Ellie had stopped chewing. She'd been watching them in the reflection of the window, catching the words in fragments, and now she turned fully in her seat. What does that mean? Both men looked at her. Neither of them looked surprised that she'd been listening. "It means we need to get you somewhere he can't follow," Ryder said. "Or we could just—" She stopped herself. "Could just what?" Bull asked. She looked down at the table, at the plate, at the ring left by the mug. "My mom's sister, Patricia. She lives in Billings. She doesn't know—" Her voice caught slightly, and she corrected it. "She doesn't know everything, but she'd take me in, if she understood." The two men exchanged a look that carried a full conversation in about 3/4 of a second. "6 hours in this weather," Bull said. "7," Ryder said, "with stops." He looked at Ellie. "When's the last time you talked to her?" "Patricia." "Christmas. We texted at Christmas." "She pick up if you called?" "I think so, yes." He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, and she watched him work through something, some internal architecture of the problem, the way a man works through a problem he's been trained to solve under pressure and has not yet been given enough information to solve correctly. His hands were still on the mug. "There's something else," he said. It wasn't a question. She pulled at her sleeve. The left one. She didn't mean to, and she caught herself doing it, and stopped. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "The deputy," she said. "The one who came to the house, twice." She was looking at the table. "His name is Greer, Dale Greer. He and Wade, they've known each other since high school. He's the one who—" She stopped again. Something was sitting in her chest that was very large and very old and was pressing upward in a way that scared her. "He told me it was a family dispute. Both times. And then he told Wade." She paused. "Both times." The silence that followed had a different quality than the silences before it. Bull set down his coffee. Ryder said nothing. But something had changed in the air of that diner. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way that pressure changes before weather arrives, the way the quality of stillness shifts when something has been decided. "Greer's still the duty deputy tonight?" Bull said. Ryder had his phone out again. He looked at something on the screen. "Yep." "And Terrence Hod is at the Sunoco?" "Yep." Bull leaned forward. His voice was very level. "So if Terrence calls Wade right now, Wade calls Greer. And Greer has the authority to pull us over on this road," Ryder said, "for any reason or no reason." He looked at Ellie. "Which means we're not driving to Billings tonight. Not on Route 9. Ellie's chest tightened. "Then what—" "There are other roads," Ryder said. He was already texting something. "Older ones. Bull knows them." "I know all of them," Bull said. "But first—" Ryder set the phone down and turned to face her fully for the first time since she'd sat down. In the flat fluorescent light, his face was harder to read than she'd thought. The scar through his eyebrow, the lines around his eyes that suggested less age than experience, the thing behind the eyes themselves that she still hadn't fully mapped. "I need to know what we're dealing with, not the version you'd tell a deputy." He paused. "The real one." Ellie looked at him for a long time. The rain rattled the window. The heater cycled. Somewhere in the back, Dennis was washing something in a metal sink, the sound muffled and distant. "Wade Mercer," she said. "He married my mom when I was 11. She died when I was 13. She said it flat, the way she'd learned to say it, stripped of all inflection, because inflection opened doors she didn't have the capacity to walk through in public. Car accident, that's what they said. Ryder's expression did not change, but something shifted slightly behind his eyes. Not pity, exactly. Something older than pity. Something that recognized a shape it had seen before. "That's what they said," he repeated. The exact phrasing, not questioning it, not accepting it, holding it up like an object that might look different in different light. "He started 2 months after the funeral," Ellie said. "The first time I thought it was— I told myself it was grief. That people did things when they were—" She stopped. She pulled both sleeves straight. "I was 13. I needed it to make sense." "How long until it stopped making sense?" "About the 3rd time." Outside, a vehicle moved slowly past the diner on the county road, not stopping, not a bike. The headlights swept the window and she flinched. The small, automatic collapse. And she saw Ryder see it, and she saw him not react to seeing it, and somehow that was worse and better simultaneously, that he saw the flinch and absorbed it without turning it into something she had to manage. 6 years, Bull said. It wasn't a question either. Yes. And the system? Twice, she said. Greer. Both times. Bull looked at Ryder. Something passed between them that she didn't have access to, something with history in it, some conversation or shared understanding that predated this night by a significant margin. Ryder's jaw tightened slightly and then released. There's a safe house, Ryder said, outside of town. Nobody knows about it except the club. It's, he seemed to consider how to characterize it, a place we use when people need to be somewhere Wade Mercer and Dale Greer don't know about. She stared at him. You've done this before. A pause. We've had occasion. People like me. He met her eyes. People the system decided weren't worth the paperwork. Ellie let out a breath, long and slow and carrying with it 3 years of calculated, exhausted survival strategy. She looked at the parking lot, at the shapes of the bikes in the rain, at the scattered figures of men standing watch in the dark. Not looking at her, not performing their presence, just present. A wall that had arrived without being asked for, built from leather and scar tissue and some collective wordless understanding of what it meant to stand between someone small and something that wanted to hurt them. She thought about the farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge, about Wade's chair, about the amber glass. She thought about Deputy Greer and his 12 minutes in the driveway and the particular tone of voice he used when he said family dispute. The way he said it like those 2 words together constituted a complete and sufficient answer to any question she might have. She thought about her mother, about the car accident, about the word said. Okay, she said. Ryder nodded. He left 2 20s on the counter, more than enough, probably double enough, and stood. Bull was already moving toward the door. Stay close, Ryder said. Don't look at Terrence's car when we pass the Sunoco. Don't look at anything. Just walk to the bike. Your bike. Yes. I've never... Hold on and lean with the turns, he said. Not against them. With them. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at the half-eaten plate and the warm mug and the flickering light above the pie case and the terrible diner that had been, for the last hour and 40 minutes, the only place in Black Hollow, Montana, where she had felt anything approaching safe. What about Dennis? She asked. Ryder glanced at the pass-through. Dennis had reappeared, and she saw the look that passed between the cook and the biker sit, brief, acknowledging, the look of men who have a history that doesn't require narration. Dennis doesn't see much, Ryder said. Occupational habit. Dennis caught her eye. He gave her a single nod. She held it a moment, and then she turned and followed Ryder toward the door. The cold hit her like a wall. The rain was ice-edged now, driven by a wind off the mountains that had no interest in being reasonable about it. Around her, in the parking lot, the bikers shifted into motion without a word, not scrambling, not hurrying, just reorganizing themselves with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed this, or something close enough to this that it had become instinct. Engines began starting in sequence, a low rumble building back toward that rolling atmospheric sound she'd heard from inside. Ryder's bike was parked closest to the door. He handed her a helmet, not asking whether she wanted it, just placing it in her hands with the expectation that she would put it on, which she did. He swung onto the bike and waited. She looked at the road. A half-mile east, she could just make out the lights of the Sunoco, and under those lights, the shape of a truck sitting in the lot with its engine running, just sitting, watching. She got on the bike. Ready? Ryder said. She thought about saying yes. She thought about saying no. She thought about the 6 years behind her and the unknown quantity of whatever came next, and the cold and the rain and the terrible coffee and the question this man had asked her that nobody had ever thought to ask before. Are you safe tonight? Go, she said. The engine opened up beneath her, and the world contracted to wind and rain, and the roar of 15 motorcycles moving through the dark, like something ancient and unstoppable. And behind her, behind all of them, the lights of the Sunoco fell away, and then disappeared entirely as they turned onto a road that wasn't on any current map, into a Montana night that was very cold and very dark, and for the first time in 6 years, moving in a direction she had chosen. Half a mile back, she didn't see the Sunoco truck pull out. She didn't see it begin to follow. And she didn't see, in the farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge, the amber glass set down slowly on a side table, and a phone picked up, and a number dialed, a number she recognized, a number that had failed her twice already. While a man who had spent 6 years making sure no one was watching him sat very still in his chair and began to make arrangements for what happened next. The road had no name and no mercy. Bull Road Point, his headlight cutting a pale tunnel through the rain and the dark, and the line of bikes followed him with the precision of men who had done this before. Not this exact thing, not this exact road, but something close enough in shape that their bodies knew the protocol without being told. Single file, spacing maintained, no unnecessary communication. The kind of discipline that isn't taught in a classroom, but is accumulated over years of making high-stakes decisions in the dark, with limited information and no margin for error. Ellie held on. She had both arms around Ryder's torso and her face pressed against the back of his jacket to keep the rain out of her eyes. And the leather smelled like motor oil and cold air, and something underneath that. Something older, something that belonged to whoever had worn this jacket through whatever it had been worn through. And the bike moved under her like a living thing, responsive to the road in a way that cars never were. Every imperfection in the asphalt transmitted directly through the frame and the seat and into her bones. She was terrified. She was also, inexplicably, more present in her body than she'd been in months. Fear does that sometimes. Strips everything non-essential away and leaves you with just the immediate moment, the road, the cold, the sound of engines in the dark, the fact of still being in motion. She didn't look back. Behind them, invisible in the rain and the distance, Terrence Hodd's truck sat at the intersection of Route 9 and the county road and didn't turn. She didn't know this. She wouldn't know it until later, until the sequence of the night had been reconstructed in the particular painstaking way that consequences reconstruct themselves after the fact. What she knew, in the moment, was the road beneath the wheels and the cold against her back, and the fact that they were moving away from something that had been waiting, in the amber-lit farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge, for her to come back. The safe house was not what she expected. She'd constructed something in her head during the 40-minute ride. Something cinematic, something with a gate and a fence and a guard rotation. The architecture of protection as she'd absorbed it from movies. What Bull's headlight eventually illuminated was a single-story structure set back from a dirt track that branched off the unnamed road through a gap in the pine trees so narrow she hadn't seen it until they were already turning through it. The house was old, not derelict, but carrying its age openly, the way some structures do. A porch that ran the full front length. Dark windows. A light burning in one room toward the back, warm yellow through curtains that had been there long enough to fade. Bull cut his engine. The others followed in sequence, the sound dying back in stages until the only noise was rain on the pine canopy and the slow tick of cooling metal. A woman opened the front door before anyone knocked. She was in her 60s, small and angular, with silver hair pulled back without ceremony and the expression of someone who had been expecting exactly this, and was moderately inconvenienced by the timing. She looked at the line of bikes. She looked at Bull. She looked at Ellie, still on Ryder's bike with the helmet half off and rain running down her face. "How many nights?" the woman said. "Don't know yet, June," Bull said. She looked at Ellie again. Something moved across her face that was not quite pity and not quite recognition, but lived somewhere between them. "Come inside," she said. Not to the group. To Ellie specifically. "You're soaked." The inside of the house smelled like pine wood and something cooking, something with onions and heat in it. And the warmth hit Ellie hard enough that she stopped moving in the doorway for a moment, just to hold it, the way you hold something you'd forgotten you were allowed to have. June moved past her into a kitchen that was clean and functional and aggressively unsentimental and started producing towels and a dry flannel shirt from somewhere without making a production of it. Most of the bikers stayed outside. 4 came in. Bull, Ryder, and 2 others she hadn't been introduced to. One lean and pale, with a scar that ran from his ear to the corner of his mouth. The other younger, maybe 25, who carried himself with the tightly wound energy of someone perpetually on the edge of needing something to do with his hands. They spread out through the front room with the automatic efficiency of people establishing a perimeter, which is what they were doing. She understood that now. The way understanding sometimes arrives not as a revelation, but as a simple, quiet registration of what's been true all along. Sit, June told her. She sat. She sat at a kitchen table while June put a bowl of something in front of her, and Ryder settled into a chair across the room, and the others found their positions, and the house arranged itself around her like a system that had been built for exactly this purpose, even if it hadn't known her name until tonight. She ate. She didn't speak. Neither did anyone else for a while. It was Ryder who broke it. "Tell me about the car accident," he said. June looked at him briefly. Then she looked at Ellie. The question had not been asked gently, but it hadn't been asked brutally either. It had been asked the way a man asks a question when he has been holding it since the moment it first presented itself, and has decided that holding it any longer costs more than it's worth. "I was 13, Ellie said. "I know how old you were. Tell me about the accident." She set down her spoon. She looked at the table, at the grain of the wood, at the place where two planks met, and the join was slightly uneven. She had not talked about this. Not with anyone. Not with Jade, not with her school counselor, not with the social worker who had appeared twice at the school in the year after her mother died, and who had asked questions with the clipboard and concern and energy of someone fulfilling a procedural requirement rather than actually trying to understand something. "Route 12, she said. "February. They said she missed a turn, went off the embankment above Callister Creek." She paused. "The road was icy." "Was it?" She looked up. "The report said it was." "What did the road feel like that morning?" "When you went to school." A long pause. She had been 13. She had been on the bus. She had been looking out the window at the morning and the mountains and thinking about what? Something ordinary. Some 13-year-old thing. And the road had been... She pulled at the memory, the actual physical memory of it. The bus on the pavement, the particular sound tires made on different surfaces. "Wet," she said slowly. It was wet. It had rained overnight, but it... She stopped. It wasn't icy, not on the main road. Route 12 is a main road, yes. And Callister Creek is, what, 12 miles from the house? About that. "Where was she going?" he asked. At 6 in the morning in February, the question landed with a weight she was not prepared for, even though she had prepared for it. Had prepared for it for 4 years without knowing she was preparing for it, had carried it in the back of her skull like a low-grade headache so familiar she'd stopped identifying it as pain. She had asked that question to herself so many times that it had become part of her interior landscape rather than an active inquiry. "She didn't tell me," Ellie said. "She was already gone when I got up." "Did she leave a note?" "No." "Was that normal, leaving early without telling you?" "No." The word was very flat in the kitchen, very final. The silence that followed it had the quality of something that had been sitting in a room for a long time finally being acknowledged out loud. Bull cleared his throat from the doorway. "Ryder." "I know," Ryder said. "You're pushing." "Yeah." He looked at Ellie. "I'm sorry." "You don't have to." "No," she said. And then, to her own surprise, she said, "Keep going." He held her gaze for a moment. Whatever he was looking for, or confirming, he seemed to find it. "Was there an investigation after the accident?" "Greer investigated it." The name settled into the room with the specific gravity of something that had been expected and was no less significant for being expected. She watched the two men, Ryder and Bull, exchange nothing that could be called a look exactly, but something that passed between them that communicated several things simultaneously and efficiently. "Same Greer," Bull said. "Same Greer," Ryder confirmed. Ellie's hands were on the table. She looked at them. She was aware, suddenly, of how much she was saying, how much she had said in the last 2 hours to people who were strangers, technically, by any legal or social definition of the word. She was aware of the risk calculus involved in that, the specific vulnerability of disclosure, of handing someone the architecture of your damage and watching to see what they'd do with it. "Why are you asking about my mother?" she said. "Because you said that's what they said," Ryder told her. "Not my mother died in an accident. You said that's what they said. Like you've been carrying the difference between those two sentences for 4 years. She pulled her sleeves straight. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The younger biker, the one with the wound-up energy, had his phone out. He'd been on it quietly for the last few minutes, and she hadn't paid attention to it, assuming it was personal, assuming it was anything other than what it actually was. He looked up now. "I'm getting something on the scanner," he said. "Speak English, Tuck," Bull said. "Police radio? Local frequency. Getty." He turned the phone so the speaker faced the room, and the sound resolved from static into voice. Tinny, dispatched, official. Reports a minor female, 17 years old, Elizabeth Mercer, taken from the family residence by unknown subjects believed to be... Ellie went cold. Multiple motorcycles believed to be affiliated with the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club operating out of... "He moved fast," Bull said. "Greer was already awake," Ryder said. He wasn't looking at the phone, he was looking at Ellie. He was waiting for the call. "The father is requesting emergency assistance and has filed a formal missing person report with the county sheriff's office. All units, please be advised." Tuck lowered the phone. The kitchen was very quiet. "I'm not missing," Ellie said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised her. I left on my own." "You're 17, Bull said, not cruelly, just stating the weight of the number. "I know how old I am." "What that means legally." "I know what it means." She pushed back from the table. Not all the way. Not standing, just creating space, the physical expression of needing room to think. "It means Wade just turned this into a kidnapping." "Yes." "He's going to say you took me." "Yes." "And Greer is going to..." "Yes," Ryder said. "Ellie, we know." She looked at him, at the steadiness of his face, at the thing behind his eyes that she was still mapping, still trying to assign a name to. It wasn't calm exactly, not the calm of someone unaffected, but more the calm of someone who has spent significant time in situations where panic was expensive and has developed the discipline to not spend it until the math requires it. "What do we do?" she said. "We document," Ryder said. "Tonight, before anything else." She stared at him. "Document. You, the bruises, all of it." He paused. "June has a camera, and there's an independent clinic 30 miles south, in Harlan. Not county. Not Wade's reach." Another pause. "But it needs to be tonight, before anything heals." The word heals hung in the kitchen air between them. She understood what he was saying. She understood the clinical necessity of what he was saying. She also felt the full weight of what it meant, the specific exposure of it, the vulnerability of being documented, of having the thing she'd hidden under long sleeves for 3 years cataloged under fluorescent light by people she didn't know. "Okay," she said, quietly. The same word she'd said outside the diner, but with something different underneath it now. Not just permission, but something more deliberate. A choice made with fuller information. June appeared from the doorway with a camera in her hands. She was looking at Ellie with an expression that was the opposite of pity. It was the expression of someone who understood precisely and without drama what was being asked and what it cost. "I'll do it," June said to the room in general, which meant everyone else leave, which they did, without being told twice. What happened in the next 20 minutes in that kitchen was between the two of them. What emerged from it was a series of photographs that documented, methodically and without ambiguity, 6 years of a story that had never been officially told. Ellie held herself very still throughout. She looked at the wall. She breathed. At one point, June said quietly, "You did good, keeping yourself alive." And Ellie didn't respond because she didn't have anything she trusted herself to say to that, but something in the center of her chest shifted very slightly, like a door that's been warped by water finally finding its frame. They drove to Harlan in 2 vehicles. June's truck, which was old and anonymous and bore no identifying markings, and one bike that rode flanking position far enough back to not be immediately visible. Tuck drove the bike. Bull stayed at the safe house. Ryder sat in the back seat of the truck next to Ellie and didn't speak, which was correct, which was the only thing that would have been correct. The clinic in Harlan was run by a woman named Dr. Vasquez, who had short gray hair in a direct manner and who did not appear to find anything about the situation surprising, which Ellie found oddly comforting. She examined Ellie with the methodical thoroughness of someone who had done this before and intended to do it right. She made notes in a file. She took her own photographs. She asked specific questions in the particular flat, clinical vocabulary of someone who has learned that clinical vocabulary is kinder than emotional vocabulary in certain examinations because it removes the weight of interpretation and leaves only fact. When it was over, she sat across from Ellie in a small consultation room with a ficus in the corner that needed water and said, without preamble, "You know what I'm required to report." "Yes," Ellie said, "and you know what that report will trigger in terms of county response." "Greer," Ellie said. Dr. Vasquez looked at her. A pause. "Tell me about Greer." Ellie told her. All of it. The 2 visits, the 12 minutes in the driveway, the tone of voice, the paperwork that went nowhere. Dr. Vasquez listened without interrupting. When Ellie finished, the doctor looked at the file in her lap and then back up. "There's a state-level reporting mechanism that bypasses county," she said. "I can use that instead." She paused. "It's slower, but it doesn't go through Greer." "How much slower?" "Days, maybe a week." "A week," Ellie said. "You'd need somewhere safe to be for that week." "We have somewhere," Ryder said from the doorway. He'd been there for some portion of the conversation. She didn't know how long, she hadn't heard him arrive. And Dr. Vasquez looked at him without alarm, which suggested she knew him or knew of him, one or the other. "Iron Saints," the doctor said. "Yes, ma'am." She looked at him for a moment. She looked at his jacket. She seemed to be running some internal calculation, not about whether to trust him exactly, but about whether her read of the situation was consistent with available evidence. "I've seen 2 other girls," she said to him. Not to Ellie, to him. In the last 5 years, both from Black Hollow, both with similar presentations. She paused. Neither of them made it to a report. Ryder's jaw tightened. "What happened to them?" "Scared off? Recanted? The first one's in Billings now. The second one..." She stopped. "I don't know where the second one is." The room was very quiet. "What are you telling me?" Ryder asked. "I'm telling you that Wade Mercer has done this before," the doctor said. "And I'm telling you that whatever system is supposed to stop it has been, that the system has not been functioning the way it's supposed to function." She looked at the file again. "I'm also telling you that what I have in this file is the most complete documentation I've ever had, and that I intend to use the state mechanism, and I intend to attach her records from both her previous reports to Greer's office to demonstrate the pattern." "Can you do that?" "I can do a lot of things when I have documentation," she said, and the way she said it suggested she had been waiting, with some patience, for documentation to exist. They drove back through the rain. Ellie sat with her hands in her lap and watched the dark trees go past the window and thought about the second girl, the one the doctor didn't know the location of. She thought about the farmhouse, about the amber glass, about the way Wade could make his voice go soft when he needed it to, the particular performance of reasonableness he could produce on demand, the version of himself he showed to Greer and the school and the town, the version that functioned as camouflage for the other version that only existed inside the house on Cutter's Ridge. She thought about her mother, about 6 in the morning in February, about Route 12 and Callister Creek, and the road that had been wet but not icy. She was still thinking about it when they got back to the safe house and found Ryder standing in the front room with Bull and the lean, scarred man, whose name she still didn't know, and Tuck, and all 4 of them had a quality to their stillness that was not the stillness of people at rest. "What happened?" she said. Bull looked at Ryder. Ryder looked at her. "Terrence Hodd followed us," Tuck said, "part of the way. We lost him on the back roads, but he knows the general area," Ryder said. "He doesn't know the house, but he knows we're somewhere in this quadrant." "That's not the problem," Bull said. She looked at him. "What's the problem?" "Greer put out a bulletin," the lean man said. His voice was low, slightly hoarse, like someone who smoked or had, at some point, sustained some damage to his vocal cords that had healed imperfectly. "State bulletin. Not just county. He went over his pay grade. "You can't do that," she said. "A missing person report for a 17-year-old doesn't trigger—" "He filed it as an endangerment," Ryder said, "which changes the category." She stared at him. "He said you endangered me." "Yes." "That's—" She stopped. She felt something hot move up through her chest, something with edges to it. Not quite anger, or not just anger, something more complicated, the specific emotion of watching a known mechanism deploy against you in real time, the thing you'd been afraid of and predicted, and still, somehow, were not fully prepared to feel the full weight of when it arrived. "He can't—" "He's doing it," Ryder said. "He's already doing it." She sat down on the arm of the couch. She pressed both hands flat against her thighs. The room waited. "Wade has state contacts," she said. It came out quieter than she expected. "I heard him on the phone once, a year ago. He was talking to someone. Not Greer, someone else. And he was—" The tone was different. Not the way he talks to people he doesn't need, the way he talks when he needs something from someone. She paused. "I don't know who it was." The four men looked at each other. "How extensive is this?" Ryder said. Not to her. To the room. "Don't know yet," Bull said. "We need to know." "Yeah. Because if Greer has state contacts, then this is bigger than Greer," Bull said. "And bigger than Wade." The lean man spoke from the corner. "There's something else." He said it the way people said there's something else, when what they meant was, "I've been waiting to say this, and I'm saying it now because we've run out of road to delay on." He looked at Ryder specifically. Not at Bull. Not at Ellie. At Ryder. Ryder looked back at him. "Say it, Cass." The man named Cass pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket. He unfolded it and held it out. Ryder took it. He read it. His face didn't change, but something behind it did. Something that moved through him like a current moving through water, invisible on the surface but affecting everything underneath. "What is it?" Ellie asked. Nobody answered immediately. She watched Ryder fold the paper and hold it at his side and look at the floor for exactly 4 seconds before he looked back up. "It's a property record," he said. "For what property?" A pause. "Callister Creek," he said. "Specifically, a parcel of land adjacent to the embankment above the creek." He paused again. "Wade Mercer transferred ownership of it 9 months before your mother's accident." The room was very still. "Transferred it to who?" she said. "A holding company," Ryder said. "A holding company that, when you run the registration through 2 layers of paperwork, comes back to a name." He looked at her. His eyes were steady. Whatever he was feeling was being held somewhere that she didn't have access to yet. "Dale Greer." Ellie heard herself take a breath. Heard it the way you heard things from outside yourself when something was too large to be processed from inside. The breath, the sound of the rain on the roof, the tick of a clock somewhere in the house, the faint idle of Tuck's bike outside that he'd left running for reasons she didn't know. "He didn't just fail to investigate the accident," she said. "No," Ryder said. He had a financial relationship with Wade. Before the accident, he had a reason to close the case." She stood up. Not because she had somewhere to go, just because sitting felt wrong in a way her body couldn't continue tolerating. She walked to the window. She looked out at the rain and the dark pine trees and the shapes of bikes, and the one bike still running with its single light throwing a pale cone into the wet dark. She had been 13. She had been on a bus. She had been thinking about something ordinary. She had come home from school and the house had been very quiet, and Wade had been sitting in his chair without the television on, which was unusual, and he had told her in a voice she didn't recognize as his voice, too even, too arranged, that her mother had been in an accident, that she hadn't survived, that things were going to be different now. She had believed him. She had believed him because she was 13, and she had no mechanism yet for the specific disbelief required to look at a person who was supposed to be a parent and think, you did this, and you're sitting in that chair and telling me about it in a voice you practiced." She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the window. Behind her, Ryder said her name. Just her name. Nothing after it. She was leaving him, Ellie said. The words surprised her. They surprised her because she hadn't known she was going to say them, and she hadn't known she knew them, hadn't known that underneath the 4 years of carrying the question of the early morning and the wet road and the word said, there had been an answer sitting, waiting for the property record and the holding company in Greer's name to give it permission to exist. She turned around. 6 in the morning, she said. February. She packed something. I know because her blue bag was gone, the one she kept in the closet. And I didn't realize that until months later, until after, when I was looking for it because it smelled like her. Her voice was steady. She was distantly amazed by how steady it was. She was leaving. She packed the bag and she left at 6 in the morning, and she was going somewhere. Maybe Patricia. Maybe a shelter. I don't know. But she was leaving. And Wade knew, Bull said. Wade knew, she said. He must have known, and Greer knew. Or Greer found out afterward and decided knowing was worth something. Ryder was very still across the room. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him all night, trying to map the thing behind his eyes. And for the first time, she thought she could see the shape of it clearly. Not calm, not discipline. Something older and more specific than either of those things. The particular face of a person who has been living with a guilt that isn't symmetrical. A guilt with a specific name and a specific shape. A before and after structure built around a single moment when something should have been done and wasn't. Or when something was done and shouldn't have been. Or when simply being present wasn't enough and you'd been living in the aftermath of insufficient presence ever since. You had a sister, she said. The room went very quiet. She hadn't meant to say it, or she hadn't known she was going to say it. It had emerged from the same place the other sentence had, from the accumulated reading of a person across 2 hours and 40 minutes of proximity. The way you read people when reading them correctly is a survival skill you've been developing since you were 11 years old. Ryder didn't answer immediately. He looked at her with an expression that was not defensive and not exposed, but somewhere in the narrow space between, the face of someone who has been found out and is deciding in real time whether to confirm or deflect or simply hold it. Yeah, he said. What happened to her? A pause that lasted long enough to have a weight to it. I wasn't there, he said. Nothing else. Those 3 words carrying the full architecture of whatever it was. Deployment, distance, the specific impossible arithmetic of being somewhere necessary when the necessary place was somewhere else, and the person who needed you didn't have anyone else, and you found out afterward, and afterward is the only direction time moves, and you spend the rest of your life knowing that. Bull moved from the doorway into the room. Okay, he said, with the authority of a man calling something to order. Here's where we are. We have documentation. We have a doctor willing to file with the state. We have a property record that connects Greer to Wade before the accident. And we have a state bulletin that means every cop between here and Billings is looking for a club that's just been painted as kidnappers. He looked around the room. What we don't have is time. How much time? Tuck asked. Wade knows the general area. Terrence knows the quadrant. Once the state bulletin hits the morning shift, there's going to be eyes on these roads. Bull looked at Ryder. We need to move her, and we need to figure out the best way to make sure the evidence gets somewhere it can't be buried before we do. Patricia, Ellie said. My aunt. She needs to know. We'll reach out, Bull said. No. Her voice had an edge to it that surprised her. Surprised her and didn't surprise her. The edge of someone who has been managed and handled and processed by systems for long enough to know the difference between being helped and being moved around. I call her, me. She hears my voice, and she hears what's happening from me, not from... She stopped. Not from anyone else. Ryder looked at Bull. Bull nodded. She dialed. It rang 4 times, 4 rings at 2:30 in the morning, each one a small eternity. And then Patricia's voice came on, rough with sleep, confused, starting with, hello? In a tone that climbed quickly from asleep to alarmed as she heard who was calling and at what hour. Aunt Pat, Ellie said. I need you to listen to me. I'm okay, but I need to tell you something about Mom. The sound on the other end of the phone, the sharp intake of breath, the sudden silence of someone sitting up in bed in the dark, was the sound of a world beginning to rearrange itself around a truth that had been kept from it for 4 years. Outside, the rain was still falling. The bike sat in the dark. Tuck's engine idled. And 3 miles away, On a dirt road that intersected the unnamed road at a point Bull had somehow overlooked, a pair of headlights sat very still in the dark, pointed at nothing, killing time. Waiting. Because Terrence Hod was not, as it turned out, working alone tonight. And the man who had made the phone call from the amber-lit farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge had not called Greer first. He'd called someone else, someone whose name was not in any county record, whose connection to Wade Mercer existed in a register that was significantly more informal and significantly more dangerous than a property deed or a dispatch log, and whose particular skill set had nothing to do with law enforcement. In the kitchen of the safe house, Ellie held the phone and listened to her aunt cry and did not let herself cry back, because she needed to be clear and she needed Patricia to hear clarity, not grief. And there would be time for grief later. There would be time for all of it later, the full catastrophic accounting of what had been lost and what had been done, and what 4 years of carrying this alone had actually cost. Right now, there was only the next hour, and what happened in the next hour was going to determine whether the evidence they had survived long enough to matter. Ryder's phone buzzed. He looked at it. He looked at Bull. Cutter's Ridge, he said. What's that? What about it? Security camera footage from the neighbor 3 parcels down. Hector Vane. He's got cameras facing the road. He paused. Hector sent me a clip. Why does Hector Vane have your number? Cass asked. Because Hector Vane's daughter was the first girl, Ryder said. The one who's in Billings now. The room absorbed this. What's on the clip? Bull said. Ryder looked at the screen. He watched it for a moment. Whatever was on it, his expression did what it always did. Held the surface steady while something moved underneath it. He turned the phone so the others could see. She couldn't see the screen from where she was standing, but she could see Cass's face when he looked at it, and the thing that moved across Cass's face was enough. What is it? She said. Ryder turned the phone to face her. The footage was grainy. Low resolution, night vision washed out gray, the timestamp in the corner reading 11:47 p.m., which was approximately 20 minutes after she had walked out of the farmhouse and started the 4-mile walk to Rosie's Diner. The image showed the road in front of the Mercer property. A truck she didn't recognize was pulling in. A figure got out. Not Wade's build, narrower, wearing something dark, and carried something to the truck's cab. Carried it from the house, 2 trips, 3. The 3rd trip, the figure passed through the edge of the porch light. She knew the face. She did not know his name. She knew his face from the one time she'd seen him at the farmhouse, 8 months ago. A Sunday afternoon, Wade sending her upstairs with a look that meant stay there and don't come down. The sound of voices below, one of which was Wade's, and one of which was a voice she'd assigned to the narrow face she was now looking at on a 4-inch screen in a safe house in the rain. Who is that? She said. I don't know yet, Ryder said. He was already forwarding the image. But he was in your house tonight, and he was taking things out of it. Evidence, Cass said, before the morning. Before any state investigator could request access to the property, Ryder said. He locked the phone and put it in his jacket. His face had settled into something that was not quite anger, not the hot, reactive kind, but something colder and more precise, the face of a man who has moved from the phase of the situation where things are being discovered to the phase where things need to be done. Ryder, Bull said, with a tone that meant carefully. I know, Ryder said. We can't go to the property. I know. If we go to the property, I said I know, Bull. He looked at the older man. Something passed between them. Not a fight, not quite, but the shadow of one, the shape of a disagreement with deep roots. I'm not going to the property. You look like someone who's deciding whether to go to the property. I'm deciding what we do next, Ryder said, which is different. He looked at Ellie. Patricia, how soon can she get here? She said morning. She's leaving now. Good. He looked at Bull. We need the clinic footage. Whatever cameras Vasquez has outside that clinic, we need to know if they caught anything. And we need Hector's full recording, not just the clip. Everything from tonight. On it, Tuck said. And we need to know who that man is. Cass was already on his phone. The house reorganized itself into motion. Quiet motion. Purposeful. Each person moving into a specific lane of the next thing that needed to happen. Ellie stood in the center of it and was aware, for the first time in the night, of a specific kind of exhaustion. Not physical or not only physical, but the exhaustion of the specific cognitive load of surviving, the way your brain burned fuel trying to track threat from all directions simultaneously, the way you consumed yourself slowly over years of that kind of vigilance until the fatigue was so deeply embedded it had become structural. She sat down at the kitchen table. June appeared with coffee. Real coffee. Not the terrible kind, the kind that smelled like it would do what it was supposed to do, and set it in front of her without speaking, and then stood at the counter with her own cup and looked out the window at the rain. "You've done this before," Ellie said, not a question. "Some version of it," June said. "The other girls." June looked at her. "And others who weren't girls." She sipped her coffee. "This house has held a lot of people who needed somewhere to be while the rest of it got figured out." "Whose house is it?" June smiled. It was small and a little complicated. "Mine," she said. "It belonged to my husband first, but he's been gone a long time." She paused. "He was Iron Saints, one of the first." Ellie looked at her, at the silver hair and the angular face, and the expression of someone who has outlasted a significant amount of the world that shaped her. "What was he like?" "Hard," June said. "Soft in exactly the places he didn't want anyone to know about." She looked back out the window. "Sound familiar?" Ellie thought about the man in the front room, about "Are you safe tonight?" About 3 words carrying the weight of an entire architecture of loss. She opened her mouth to respond. She didn't get to. From the front room, Tuck's voice, sharp, stripped of the wound-up energy, something new underneath it that was not energy at all but its opposite. "Bull, Ryder, you need to see this." Both men appeared in the kitchen doorway within seconds. Tuck held up his phone. On the screen, the police scanner app was running, and the voice coming from it was not the dispatched procedural voice of the earlier bulletin. It was urgent. It was breaking across 2 frequencies simultaneously. And what it was saying clearly, in the flat, operational language of emergency response that drained all the drama out of catastrophe and left only logistics, was that there was a fire. A structure fire on Callister Creek Road, at the address of the property adjacent to the embankment, the property that had been transferred 9 months before the accident from Wade Mercer to Dale Greer. Something was burning. And in the kitchen of the safe house, Ellie Mercer set down her coffee cup and understood, with the complete and terrible clarity of someone who has just watched the last exit close behind them, that whatever this was, whatever tonight had begun as, and whatever it was becoming, there was no version of the morning that looked like it had looked before any of this started. Wade was not just covering his tracks, he was burning them. And the man in the grainy footage, the narrow face, the dark clothes, 3 trips from the house to the truck, had a 12-minute head start on everything they thought they... The fire was still burning. Tuck had the scanner running on 2 frequencies, and the voice coming through it had the quality of controlled emergency. Clipped, professional, stripped of everything that wasn't operationally necessary. And what it was saying, beneath the codes and the coordinates and the dispatch language, was that the structure on Callister Creek Road was burning too completely to save, and that the responding units were focused on containment rather than preservation, because there was nothing left to preserve. Ryder stood in the middle of the safe house front room and listened to it and didn't move. Bull was on his phone. Cass was on his phone. Tuck had his laptop open on the coffee table, 3 windows running simultaneously. The scanner feed, a satellite map of the Callister Creek area, and whatever search he was running on the narrow-faced man from Hector's footage, which so far had returned nothing useful, which was itself a kind of information. People who returned nothing useful from a search were people who had been specifically arranged to return nothing useful. Ellie stood in the kitchen doorway. She was watching Ryder. She'd been watching him since Tuck called them in, watching the specific quality of his stillness, which had changed since the footage and the fire, had shifted into something that was no longer the disciplined stillness of a man holding himself back from reaction, but something more interior and more complicated, a man running a private calculation whose terms she didn't have full access to. "Ryder," Bull said. He covered the mouthpiece of his phone. "Hector's got more footage." "How much more?" "Enough." A pause. The narrow-faced man didn't come alone. There was a second vehicle, arrived earlier, before the girl left the house. Ryder looked at him. Before she left. An hour before, came and went. Bull's jaw was set. Wade was planning for her leaving before she left. Ellie stepped into the room. He knew I was going to run. Nobody contradicted her. She thought about it. About the last few days. The specific texture of the last few days at the farmhouse. Whether there had been something different in the atmosphere. Some shift in the barometric pressure of Wade's moods that had registered below her conscious threshold, but had still registered somewhere in the body's early warning systems. She thought about Tuesday, about the way he'd watched her at dinner. Not the usual watching, which had its own terrible grammar, but something more calculating, more patient, like a man who was already ahead of the current moment. He's been planning this, she said. Not just tonight. He's been thinking about what to do if I ran. The property record, Ryder said. The holding company. That's not something you set up overnight. No, she said. Greer is connected to Wade through money. Real money. Land money. He looked at her. What did Wade do? Before. For work. She thought. Construction. He had a company. He sold it when It was before my mom. He said he didn't need to work anymore. What did he sell it for? I don't know. A lot. He never talked about numbers. And after the sale, he was just there, at the house. She paused. He had meetings, sometimes. He'd be gone for a day, sometimes two. He never said where. Cass looked up from his phone. I've got a name. The room oriented toward him. Narrow face. The man from the footage. He held up the phone. On the screen, a DMV photo. Grainy, a few years old, but enough. The narrow face, the dark eyes. His name is Calvin Pruitt. He's got a sheet. Nothing major. A receiving charge from 2019, a dismissed assault from 2021, but he's listed as a private contractor. For what? That's the interesting part. Cass set the phone on the coffee table so the screen faced up. His LLC lists one primary client, a land development company out of Great Falls called Ridgeline Holdings. He paused. Ridgeline Holdings is the parent company of the holding company that owns the Callister Creek parcel. The silence was thick. Greer, Bull said. Greer is a shareholder, Cass said, but he's not the primary, not even close. He looked at Ryder. The primary shareholder of Ridgeline Holdings is a man named Arthur Breck. He's a county commissioner, has been for 11 years. Ryder absorbed this. And Wade? Wade's LLC, the construction company he supposedly sold, was the original contractor for Ridgeline's first 3 development projects, before he sold it. Cass paused. He didn't really sell it. He converted it. Different name, different structure, but the same EIN if you go back far enough. They're all in it together, Tuck said. Not all together, Cass said. They're layered. Greer works for Breck. Wade works with Breck. Pruitt does the physical work for all of them. He looked at the room. This is a machine, not a friendship. It's a machine for making problems disappear and for making money off land that other people used to own. Ellie sat down on the arm of the couch because her legs had decided, without consulting the rest of her, that they were done standing. She pressed both hands flat on her thighs. She could feel her pulse in her palms, a fast, irregular rhythm that she was aware of the way you became aware of your own breathing in certain moments. Suddenly, unavoidably, the body insisting on being noticed. My mother's land, she said. Cass looked at her. The farmhouse, she said. Cutter's Ridge. My mother's family owned it, before Wade. She stopped. Her parents left it to her. When they died. She stopped again. The arithmetic of it was assembling itself in real time in her head with the specific cold efficiency of something that was not surprising and was completely devastating simultaneously. She was the only way Wade got that property. And if she left him, Bull began. She'd take it with her. Ellie's voice was very flat. She had a lawyer. She'd seen a lawyer in Harlan. I found a business card once. I didn't understand what it was. I was 13. I just thought it was a lawyer's card. She looked at the floor. Divorce lawyer. The room went quiet enough that the scanner's background static was audible, and underneath it, the faint sound of rain, and underneath that, the sound of the bikes outside in the dark, just existing, just being present. The mechanical heartbeat of the club's patient, weathered attention. She was going to leave him and take the land, Ryder said. Yes. And he knew. He knew. She said it without inflection, without drama, because it was past the point where drama was available to her. She had traveled through the dramatic register of this realization and out the other side into something colder and simpler and more durable. He knew, and he called Pruitt. And Pruitt did something on that road. And then Greer closed it. And then Breck made sure it stayed closed, Cass said. And I was 13, Ellie said. And I went to school on the bus, and I came home, and Wade told me there'd been an accident. She heard her own voice say the words. She heard the flatness of them. She felt, somewhere beneath the flatness, the 13-year-old version of herself hearing the same words for the first time. The version that had believed him, that had needed to believe him, that had built 4 years of increasingly strained rational architecture around the necessity of believing him, because the alternative was something her 13-year-old mind hadn't had the structural capacity to hold. She could hold it now. She held it. Ryder crouched down so he was at eye level with her, the way adults crouch to speak to children, except this wasn't that. This was just a man who understood that some things needed to be said at the same level. Ellie. She looked at him. You didn't know, he said. I know I didn't know. I mean, you couldn't have known. At 13, you couldn't have... I know, she said. And then, because something in her chest required it. Does that matter right now? He held her gaze for a moment. No, he said. Right now, it doesn't. So what matters right now? He stood up, turned to the room. Breck, he said. Bull looked at him steadily. He's a county commissioner. I know what he is. Which means going after him through informal channels isn't... I'm not talking about informal channels. Ryder's voice was level. Even. The kind of level even that took significant effort to maintain, and that Bull, who had known him long enough to read the effort, was watching with the specific attention of a man who had been in the position before of needing to make sure someone didn't tip into the territory where level even became something else entirely. I'm talking about getting what we have to someone who can use it, someone outside Breck's reach. The state mechanism Vasquez mentioned, Cass said. Yes, but faster. There's a state attorney general's investigative office, independent of county, independent of the commission. He looked at Cass. You know anyone there? Cass was already scrolling. I know someone who knows someone. That's good enough. Tonight. It's 3 a.m. I know what time it is. Tuck looked up from the laptop. There's a problem. Add it to the list, Bull said. The surveillance footage from the clinic, Dr. Vasquez's cameras. Tuck turned the laptop so they could see the screen. The exterior camera was pointing at the parking lot, which means it caught something coming in as we were leaving. He pointed to a timestamp in the upper corner, 4:17 a.m. We were there until 4:10, Ryder said. Yeah. Tuck's finger moved to a shape in the parking lot on the screen. A vehicle. Not a patrol car, no markings, no light bar. A dark truck. It sat in the lot for 22 minutes and then left. Pruitt? Bull said. Wrong truck. Different plate. Tuck zoomed in. The resolution degraded, but the shape held. I ran the plate through a contact. It comes back to a fleet vehicle. He looked up. Ridgeline Holdings. The room recalibrated. They knew she went to the clinic, Ryder said. They followed from the safe house? Or they guessed, Cass said. If Pruitt's been doing this for Breck long enough, he knows the protocols. He knows that if someone's trying to document and file, the clinic in Harlan is the move. He paused. He's been watching for the playbook because he's seen the playbook before. Ellie thought about the second girl, the one Dr. Vasquez didn't know the location of, the one who hadn't made it to a report. She thought about the playbook, the idea that her specific situation, her specific set of moves towards safety, had been anticipated, had been mapped in advance by the people running the machine, because the machine had processed similar situations before and had learned to close the gaps. "We're not the first people to try this," she said. "No," Bull said. "And the other times, it didn't work," he said. "Not gently. Gently would have been dishonest. Not the way it should have. Because of Breck." "Because of the machine," Ryder said. "Breck is just the part of the machine with a name and a title." He looked at her. "That's why the state AG's office matters. It's outside the machine." "You sure about that?" she said. A pause. "No," he said. "I'm not sure about anything tonight, but it's the best direction we have." She nodded slowly. She thought about Patricia, driving south through the dark and the rain, 6 hours of mountain roads, moving toward a situation she had just been given the full weight of in a middle-of-the-night phone call. She thought about what Patricia's face would look like when she arrived, whether it would hold, whether she herself would hold when she saw it. She pushed the thought away. Later. All of that was later. Cass's phone rang. He stepped away to take it. Bull moved to the window to look out at the road. Tuck went back to the laptop. The house reorganized itself into its quiet operational hum, and Ryder went to the kitchen and came back with 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Ellie without asking and sat down in the chair across from her. She held the cup. He held his. "Your sister," she said. He didn't deflect. "Yeah." "How old was she?" 22. He looked at the coffee. "I was deployed. Second tour. There was a man, her husband. 17 months of marriage." He stopped. Started again. "She called me twice. I was in a communication blackout, both times." He paused. "The third call was from my CO." Ellie did not say she was sorry. She understood, somewhere in the place she kept the knowledge of what gestures cost people, that he had not told her this in order to receive comfort. He'd told her because she'd asked, and because something in the architecture of the night had created a condition under which not telling her would have been its own kind of dishonesty. "That's why you asked," she said. "In the diner, the way you asked." "There's only one question," he said. "The rest of it, all the other questions people ask. They're for the people asking, not for the person being asked." He looked at her. "All that matters is whether you're safe. Everything else is downstream of that." "You've been downstream of it," she said, "since your sister." He looked at his coffee for a long moment. "I've been trying to be upstream," he said. "Every time since." A pause. "Sometimes it works." "Tonight?" "Still working on tonight," he said. She almost smiled. Almost. Cass came back into the room. His face had changed. The neutral operational mask he wore had shifted into something that was not quite alarm, but was alarm's quiet, controlled precursor. The face of someone who has received information and is currently processing the gap between what they expected and what they were told. "Ryder," he said. Ryder looked at him, read the face, set down his coffee. "What?" "That was my contact, the AG's office." Cass stopped, looked at Ellie briefly, then back at Ryder. "There's already an open file." Nobody moved. "On Breck?" Ryder said. "On the whole operation, Ridgeline, the land scheme, the cover-ups." Cass's voice was very controlled. "They've been building a case for 14 months. They have a confidential informant inside Breck's organization." "That's," Bull started. "That's good. That's what we need. Let him finish," Ryder said. Cass looked at the floor for 1 second and then back up. "The informant's name is in a sealed file. My contact doesn't have access to the name, but he had access to a physical description and a vehicle registration cross-referenced against the case file." He paused. "The informant drives a truck registered to a fleet account under Ridgeline Holdings." The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. "The truck at the clinic," Ryder said. "Yes." "So the man who followed us to the clinic is working for the AG's office," Cass said. "Undercover, inside Breck's operation." He let the weight of that settle. "Which means Breck doesn't know he's being watched. But he also means he can't break cover," Ryder said. "He can't make contact with us without blowing a 14-month investigation." "No." "So the state has a case. A partial case. They need more evidence." Ryder looked at the coffee table. At the phone with Pruitt's photo, at Tuck's laptop with the clinic footage, at the pieces of the night laid out in front of them like a disassembled engine whose function was becoming clearer the more components you identified. They need the documentation we already have. And they need it without Pruitt knowing we're passing it, Cass said. Because if Pruitt sees us make contact with the AG, he has to report it to Breck to maintain cover. Yes. And Breck burns everything he hasn't burned yet, Bull said. And 14 months of work disappears, Cass finished. The room was very still. Ellie set down her cup. She was aware of her breathing, of the weight of the night. Not metaphorical weight, but actual physical weight. The accumulated mass of hours of adrenaline and shock and revelation sitting in her chest and her shoulders and the base of her skull. So we can't contact the AG's office directly, she said. Not openly, Cass said. And we can't use the evidence ourselves because we're officially kidnappers. Yes. And the man in the Ridgeline truck who's actually on our side can't acknowledge us. Correct. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the water stain in the upper left corner of the safe house front room, an old stain, brown and spreading, the evidence of some previous leak that had been repaired but not painted over. She looked at it with the specific attention of someone who needs something to look at while their brain reorganizes itself around a new geometry. There has to be a way to pass the information to the AG without direct contact, she said. There is, Ryder said. He was already thinking. She could see it, the way the stillness behind his eyes had shifted from absorption to generation, from receiving information to processing it into something usable. There's a specific kind of attorney. What kind? The kind who's not afraid of commissioners. He looked at Bull. Harlan. The woman Dex used. Bull's expression shifted. Ryder, is she still practicing? That's not the point. Is she still practicing, Bull? A pause. Bull rubbed the back of his neck. A gesture, she was learning, that meant, I don't like this, but I can't argue with the logic of it. Yes, he said. She's still practicing. Who is she? Ellie asked. Her name is Grace Okafor, Ryder said. She's an attorney in Harlan. She specializes in, he paused, chose the words, in situations where official channels have been weaponized against the people who need them. She's done this before. Versions of it. And she can receive the documentation without triggering Pruitt. She's not law enforcement, Ryder said. She's not the AG's office. She's a private attorney. If she independently files with the AG using evidence her client provided, her client being Ellie, Bull said. Her client being Ellie, Ryder confirmed. He looked at her. If you agree. She absorbed this. What does it mean if I agree? Practically. It means you're represented. It means everything we've collected tonight. June's photographs, Vasquez's medical file, the property records, Hector's footage, the clinic camera footage, all of it goes through Okafor's office. She files it independently. The AG receives it through normal intake. He paused. And Pruitt's cover stays intact, and the 14-month case continues. While Breck and Wade don't know the net is closing, Cass said. Until it is, Ryder said. Ellie thought about it. She thought about the machine, about Breck and Greer and Pruitt and Wade and the land records and the holding company and the structure fire on Callister Creek Road and the second girl whose location was unknown. She thought about the version of morning in which she'd done nothing, in which she'd walked back through the rain to the farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge and put her bag back in the closet and pulled her sleeves down and sat down at the breakfast table and said nothing. She had been contemplating that version of morning for 3 years. She'd been carrying it as a weight, the option that was always technically available, the path of lowest resistance that had revealed itself over the years to be not a path at all, but a slow collapse. Call her, Ellie said. Okafor. It's 3:45 in the morning, Tuck said. Call her, Ellie said again. Ryder looked at Bull. Bull looked at Ryder. Something moved between them again. That efficient private communication, and this time it didn't carry argument or disagreement. It carried something more like recognition, like two men who have been through enough versions of enough nights to recognize when a situation has turned a corner that can't be unturned. Bull picked up his phone. He walked toward the back of the house for privacy. and Ellie listened to his footsteps recede on the wooden floor and then disappear, and the house settled back into its operational quiet. And outside, the rain was doing something slightly different than it had been doing. The angle of it had changed, driven by a wind shift, and it was hitting the east-facing window now rather than the south-facing one, which meant the weather system was moving through. By morning, she thought, it might be clear. She didn't know if that was good or not. Tuck had gone back to the laptop. Cass had stepped outside. She heard the door, felt the brief invasion of cold air, heard it close again. Ryder sat across from her in the chair and looked at his coffee and didn't drink it. "Ryder," she said. He looked at her. "The information at the farmhouse," she said. "Whatever Pruitt took out in those 3 trips." She paused. "What do you think it was?" He thought about it. "Records," he said. "Paper records, maybe a hard drive. Whatever Wade kept that physically connected him to Ridgeline." He paused. "The kind of documentation you'd keep as insurance, in case anyone inside the operation ever tried to use you as a sacrificial piece." He was protecting himself, she said, from his own partners. "People who build machines like this always keep insurance," Ryder said, "because they know what the machine does to inconvenient people." He looked at her. "Your mother was inconvenient." The word landed flatly. She didn't flinch from it. "And me?" "You're 17, he said, "running, with marks on your wrists, with a pattern of reports that went nowhere." He paused. "To them, you were contained. Until tonight." "And now?" "Now you're a liability," he said. "Same as the records Pruitt took out of the house." She let that sit in the air between them. Let it be what it was without trying to reshape it. "Are they going to come here?" she asked. "They don't know where here is," he said. "And we have time before the morning shift, but—" He stopped. "But," she prompted. "But we have a leak," he said. "Or something close to one." He looked at the table, at his hands. "Terrence found us on the back roads. He shouldn't have been able to do that." She went still. "What does that mean?" "It means someone knows our back road routes," he said. "Someone who shouldn't. Could it be coincidence that he—" "No," Ryder said. "It was very simple, very final." The quiet stretched. She pulled at her left sleeve. The gesture she'd been making all night, unconscious, automatic, and this time she caught herself doing it and stopped and made herself leave her hands still on her lap, deliberately, as a small act of resistance against the 3 years of muscle memory that had built the gesture. "Who in the club knows the back routes?" she said. His jaw tightened. "Everyone. Everyone." "They have to," he said. "It's operational knowledge." She looked at him, at the thing behind his eyes that was back. Not just the personal guilt and the discipline and the careful containment, but something new, something that had been added in the last few minutes, a layer of tightness that she recognized because she'd seen it on her own face in mirrors. The face of someone who has just been forced to consider the possibility of betrayal from inside the perimeter they trusted. "That's why you and Bull were—" "When Bull said your name and you said, 'I know,'" she said slowly. "That was about this." He looked at her for a moment. "Yeah." "You thought about it already." "I thought about the possibility," he said carefully. "There's a difference." "Who?" she said. "I don't know yet." "But you have a thought." He looked at the floor. "Yeah," he said. "I have a thought." He didn't say who. She didn't push. She understood, in the specific way that years of learning to read rooms had taught her, that some information existed in a space that required it to be processed before it could be shared, and that pushing before the processing was complete created a different kind of damage. The back door opened and Bull came back in. He had his phone at his side and his expression was different. She'd been studying his expressions all night, too. This one was new. He looked at Ryder first, then at her. "Okafor will take the case," he said. "She's driving up from Harlan. ETA 90 minutes. 90 minutes, Ryder said. "Okay. There's something else," Bull said. "There's always something else," Ryder said, but he said it without the weight of complaint. It was more like acknowledgement. The acceptance of a man who has long since understood that something else is not an exception to how situations unfold, but is in fact the fundamental nature of them. She knows the file, Bull said. The AG's file. The confidential case. He paused. She's been cooperating with the AG's office for 7 months. She's been building toward a filing window. He paused again. She said tonight might be the window. Ryder looked at him. Why tonight? Because Breck is moving, Bull said. That's what she told me. She said her contacts have been watching Ridgeline's activity and something changed 3 days ago. Capital movements, land transfers accelerating, a pattern that in her experience means someone inside the organization knows the investigation is getting close and is trying to liquidate before the net drops. He looked at Ellie. She said the farmhouse parcel, the Mercer property, was one of the pending transfers, due to finalize in 72 hours. Ellie heard herself breathe. He was going to transfer the property, she said. In 72 hours. Yes. While I was still in the house. Yes. She thought about Tuesday, about the specific quality of Wade's watching at dinner, about the patience she'd read as something else entirely, something she'd categorized incorrectly because she'd been working with an incomplete model of what he was managing. He hadn't been watching her because of what she might do. He'd been watching her because he was managing a timeline, and she was a variable in it, and he'd needed to assess the variable before the 72 hours started. He was going to sell the property and then deal with me, she said, after the transfer closed. Bull didn't answer. He didn't need to. She understood in that moment what deal with meant in the operating logic of the machine. She understood it without being told, and the understanding settled into her with a particular cold weight that had no kinship with panic, no kinship with the reactive terror she'd been carrying for 6 years. This was something different, something quieter and more absolute. The weight of a person who has just understood the full dimensions of the space they've been living in and can no longer maintain any illusion about its dimensions. I wasn't a liability when I ran, she said. I was always going to be a liability. The timeline just moved. Yes, Ryder said. He would have. Don't, Ryder said. Not unkindly, firmly. Stay in the present tense. He didn't. You're here. She looked at him, at the steadiness of his face, at the scar through his eyebrow and the hands on his knees, and the absolute quality of his presence in the room, the specific solidity of him. Not the solidity of someone who couldn't be broken. She understood by now that he was enormously breakable, had already been broken in several significant ways, but the solidity of someone who had decided at some point that was entirely his own that the fact of having been broken was not an argument for staying broken. Okay, she said. Her voice was level. 90 minutes until Okafor. What do we do until then? We organize everything we have, Ryder said. Every piece, chronological, sourced. We build the clearest possible picture of what happened and what's happening so that when Okafor sits down with it, she can act immediately. He looked at Tuck. Get the clinic footage formatted and copied. 3 copies. 3 different storage devices. On it, Tuck said. Cass. He raised his voice slightly. Through the window, she could see Cass outside, on the phone, back to the glass. Cass turned, saw Ryder gesture, came back inside on a gust of cold air and rain. What? The property records. All of them. Everything we pulled. I need it organized and printable. Already started, Cass said. And the Hector footage. Tuck's got it. Good. Ryder looked at Bull. You stay on the scanner. Any movement toward this quadrant, I want to know the second it shows up. Already on it, Bull said. Ryder looked at Ellie last. You should sleep. I'm not going to sleep. I know, but you should. What are you going to do? He picked up his coffee. It was cold by now. Both cups were, but he drank it anyway with the expression of a man who had made his peace with cold coffee a long time ago. I'm going to sit with something for a few minutes, he said. With what? He was quiet for a beat. With who knew the back roads, he said. She nodded. She didn't push. She took her own cold coffee and went to the kitchen doorway and leaned against the frame and looked at the room. At Tuck bent over the laptop, at the coffee table covered in phones and printed records, and the accumulated evidence of a night that had begun with a girl counting headlights in a diner and had become something considerably larger than that. And she thought about the machine and its components and the 72-hour timeline and Calvin Pruitt and his 3 trips from the house and the fire on Callister Creek Road, and the second girl in her own mother's blue bag packed in the dark of a February morning. She thought about the question that was sitting in the center of the room without a name yet. Who in the Iron Saints knew the back roads and had decided that information was worth something to someone else? She thought about the wound-up energy of a 25-year-old man who always needed something to do with his hands. She thought about the way Tuck had been first with the scanner, first with the clinic footage, first with every piece of digital information that had come through the room tonight. She thought about how useful that was. She thought about how useful it would be if you were trying to track someone. She looked at the back of Tuck's head, at his hands on the keyboard, at the 3 windows open on the laptop. She looked at Ryder. He was already looking at her. He had gotten there too. Maybe at the same time, maybe before. She couldn't tell. What she could tell was that the specific quality of his gaze had shifted, had narrowed slightly, had acquired the particular focus of someone who has just allowed a thought they'd been holding at arm's length to get close enough to confirm its shape. Tuck hit a key and looked at his screen and said, without turning around, "Footage is copied. 3 drives." He held up 3 USB drives, not looking at either of them. "Where do you want—" "Tuck," Ryder said. His voice was nothing special, not loud, not cold, just his name, spoken with the specific quality of someone who is about to ask a question that has only one correct answer and is waiting to see which answer they're going to get. Tuck set the drives down. He still hadn't turned around. "Tuck," Ryder said again. And the 25-year-old with the wound-up energy and the hands that always needed something to do set his hands very flat and very still on the table on either side of the laptop and didn't move and didn't turn around. And in the exhale of silence that followed, the shape of the answer to the question became clear to everyone in. Tuck turned around. His face was 25 years old, and it was also something much older than that. Something that had been living behind the wound-up energy and the quick hands and the first-with-everything efficiency. Something that had been sitting there all night waiting for the moment the room got quiet enough to see it clearly. His jaw was set. His hands were still flat on the table. He looked at Ryder and he didn't look away. And that, more than anything, told Ryder what he needed to know. "How long?" Ryder said. Not a question, a demand with the grammar of a question. Tuck's throat moved. 6 months. The number landed in the room like a physical thing. 6 months. 6 months of back road routes and safe house locations and operational timing and names. 6 months of everything the club kept inside its walls being available to something outside those walls. Bull made a sound that wasn't a word. "Who approached you?" Ryder said. "Pruitt," Tuck said. "He knew about my brother, the debt." His voice was flat. Not defensive. The specific flatness of someone who has rehearsed a confession and found that rehearsal was insufficient preparation for the actual moment. He said it would be simple, just location data, nothing that would hurt anyone. Nothing that would hurt anyone, Bull repeated. The words came out of him with a controlled, compressed fury that was somehow worse than shouting. "We had a girl in a truck on that road tonight, Tuck." "I know." "Us?" "You knew where we were going." "I know." His voice cracked slightly on the second one. Just slightly. Ryder hadn't moved. He was standing in the center of the room, and he was very still in the specific way he'd been still all night, except this was different. This was the stillness of a man who is deciding something with the full weight of everything he is. Not just the operational part, but the part underneath that. The part that had carried his sister's name for 14 years and had walked into a diner on a Thursday night in the rain and had asked one question that changed the architecture of the next 12 hours. "The route we took from the clinic," he said. Tuck's eyes dropped. "Did you send it?" A pause that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. "Yes." "While we were driving back?" "Yes." "So Pruitt knows this quadrant because you told him?" "Yes." Ryder turned away. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain and the bikes and the dark pine trees and whatever was beyond them, and he stood there for exactly 5 seconds. And in those 5 seconds, the room was completely silent, except for the scanner and the rain and the sound of Bull breathing very carefully through his nose. Then Ryder turned back. "Give me your phone, Rub," he said. Tuck slid it across the table without argument. "Your other phone." A beat. Tuck reached into his jacket pocket and produced a second phone. Smaller, prepaid, and slid that across too. Ryder picked up both. He looked at the prepaid, scrolled through it for 30 seconds. His face did not change, but something in his shoulders did. A microscopic shift. A fraction of degree. The physical translation of what he was reading. He set the phones down. Pruitt isn't Breck's only line into this, he said. There's a number in here. Outgoing. Repeated. He looked at Bull. It's a Great Falls prefix. Breck's office, Cass said from the doorway. Direct line, Ryder said. The room absorbed this. Tuck was looking at the table now, not at Ryder, not at Bull, at the wood grain in the same way Ellie had looked at it hours earlier when a sentence had been too large to look directly at. Cass, Ryder said, take him outside. Tuck stood up. He looked at Ryder once, a look that was not asking for forgiveness, that was something harder and smaller than that. The look of a man who knows the difference between the thing he did and the reasons he did it and has arrived at the understanding that the reasons don't constitute the thing. And then he walked to the door and Cass went with him and the door closed. Bull exhaled, long and slow. How bad? Bad enough, Ryder said. Pruitt knows the quadrant. He's got this road. He picked up his own phone. We have maybe an hour before someone comes down it. Okafor is 40 minutes out. Then we need the evidence packaged and ready to go with her when she arrives, and we need Ellie in that car when it leaves. He looked at Ellie, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway through all of it, who had not moved or made a sound, who had watched Tuck's face and Ryder's stillness with the focused, exhausted attention of someone for whom the revelation of betrayal was not a new category of experience, but was, instead, a familiar enough shape to recognize on sight. Can you move? Yes, she said. June. Ryder raised his voice toward the back of the house. June appeared. She had not been sleeping. Ellie didn't think June had slept at all. Pack whatever she needs, Ryder said. 10 minutes. June looked at Ellie. Ellie nodded. They moved. The next 37 minutes were the longest of the night. Ryder and Bull worked the table, organizing, printing from Tuck's laptop, copying drives, assembling the physical and digital package that represented everything they'd built since the diner. Ryder's hands moved fast and sure over the materials, no wasted motion, the economy of someone who has done logistical work under pressure enough times that pressure had become a kind of fuel rather than a drag. Bull handled the scanner and his phone simultaneously, one ear on the radio frequencies and one eye on the driveway. Ellie sat with June in the kitchen while June packed a bag she hadn't brought anything for, pulling things from closets and drawers, a change of clothes, a warm jacket that was too big by 2 sizes and perfect, a phone charger, a granola bar, the kind of practical assembly of a woman who had done this specific thing before and understood what mattered in the first 24 hours of someone else's after. At 4:52 a.m., Bull said, Ryder. The tone of it was enough. Ryder was at the window in 4 strides. Down the unnamed road in the direction they'd come from, there were lights, not moving fast, moving deliberately, the way a vehicle moved when it knew where it was going and didn't need to hurry. Not one set of lights. 2. They're coming in slow, Bull said. They want us to know they're coming. Pruitt, Ryder said. Probably. And the second vehicle. Don't know. Ryder turned from the window. His face had made a final shift, past discipline, past controlled calculation, into something that was all of those things compressed into a single point of absolute clarity. The face of a man who has run out of room to maneuver and has decided that the absence of room is not a problem, but is instead a clarification. Bull, he said, get the bikes between the house and that road. Ryder, not to engage, to block. He held Bull's gaze. We hold the driveway until Okafor gets here. That's all. We hold it. Bull looked at him for 1 second. Then he went out the door calling names, and the sound of the bikes starting up came back through the walls like something being summoned from the earth, low and rolling, one by one, until it was all of them, until the sound was less like vehicles and more like weather, filling the valley the way it had filled it in the parking lot of Rosie's Diner a lifetime of hours ago. Ellie came out of the kitchen with the bag June had packed. She looked at Ryder. Stay back from the windows, he said. I know. When Okafor's car comes down that road, I'll be ready. Don't wait for me to tell you. When you see the headlights that aren't them, you move. Ryder. She stopped him. He looked at her. She held his gaze with the steadiness of someone who has decided, sometime in the last hour, that steadiness is available to her, that it is, in fact, the only thing that is hers without condition, without anyone's permission. What they're doing. Holding the line out there. She paused. After everything tonight. After Tuck. Tuck made a bad choice, Ryder said. The rest of them are making a different one. Why? He looked at her, the scar, the eyes, the thing behind them that she had been mapping all night and had finally, in this kitchen, in the last minutes of the dark, named correctly. Not guilt, not discipline, not the dead weight of insufficient presence. Love. The hard, unromantic, operationally inconvenient kind. The kind that showed up in the rain at 3 a.m. and stood in a driveway between something small and something that wanted to hurt it. Because that's what we do, he said. Simple. Final. Outside, the two vehicles had stopped at the mouth of the driveway. A door opened. In the wet dark, a figure stepped out. Ryder could see him through the window. Not Pruitt, taller than Pruitt, broader, wearing something that caught the bike headlights as reflective and official. Not Pruitt. A badge. Greer, Bull's voice came from outside, tight and hard. And behind Greer's vehicle, the second one stopped and its door opened too, and the man who stepped out was not Pruitt, and was not anyone Ryder had seen in footage or in records, and was wearing no badge and was carrying something at his side that was not a phone and not a flashlight. Ryder's hand went to his own phone. He dialed. 3 rings. Okafor picked up. I'm 12 minutes out, she said without preamble. Drive faster, he said. Outside, Greer's voice cut through the engine noise and the rain. Iron Saints, this is Deputy Dale Greer, Black Hollow County Sheriff's Office. I have a warrant for the return of a minor in your custody, and I am ordering you to stand down and... Bull's voice came back, steady as a wall. You're on private property, Deputy. You don't have jurisdiction on private property without a county warrant served by the county sheriff, not a deputy. You want to walk that back and try again? A pause. I have a county warrant. Then where's the sheriff? Bull said. Warrant served by a deputy on private property at 5 a.m. I'd love to see the judge who signed that in the last 2 hours. Another pause, longer. Ryder watched the second man, the one without the badge. He hadn't moved since he'd gotten out of the vehicle. He was standing at the edge of the headlight cone, with his weight balanced and the thing at his side and his eyes on the house. Not on Bull, not on Greer, on the house, which meant he was looking for Ellie, which meant his job was not the confrontation at the driveway, but whatever came after it. Ellie, Ryder said without turning from the window. Yeah. Get away from the front of the house. I'm already... Further. He turned. He looked at her. Back bedroom, June's. She read his face. She went. Ryder opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit him full in the face. The rain stripped Montana cold, the kind that didn't negotiate. And he stood in it with his jacket open and his hands visible and his eyes on the second man, the one without the badge, who had now seen him come out of the house and had adjusted his angle accordingly. Greer, Ryder said, carrying his voice over the idling bikes. You know what's in this house? Greer looked at him from across the driveway. 20 feet. The lights of the bikes threw complicated shadows. I know you have a minor female who is reported. I mean the documentation, Ryder said. You know what we have. A pause. I don't know what you're talking about. Ridgeline Holdings, Ryder said. A parcel on Callister Creek. A property transfer dated 9 months before Sarah Mercer went off that embankment. He kept his voice level, conversational almost. And a fire tonight on the same road that somebody set to make sure we didn't have the records. He paused. Except we already had them, already copied, already in 3 places. He looked directly at Greer. So the fire was a waste. Greer didn't move. The second man did. Just slightly, just a shift of weight, a reorientation of the body, the first movement of someone who has been waiting for a signal and has decided the signal is close enough. Ryder's phone buzzed. He didn't take it out. He kept his eyes on the second man. From behind him, through the wall of the house, he heard June's voice. Low, direct, steady, saying something he couldn't fully make out, but whose tone he recognized as the tone of someone communicating something urgent to someone who needed to stay calm. He heard Ellie's voice respond, 2 words. He couldn't hear them, but he heard the steadiness of them. The bikes idled. The rain fell. And from the road, from the direction away from Greer, from the direction of Harlan, from the correct direction, a new set of headlights appeared, moving fast, moving with the specific urgency of someone who has been on the phone and knows what they're driving into and has decided that speed matters more than caution. Grace Okafor's car. The second man saw it too. He looked at Greer. Greer looked at him. Something passed between them, fast, small, the compressed language of people who are running out of. Greer made the wrong choice. He always had. That was, in the end, the simplest way to describe the architecture of the last 14 years. A man who had been given repeatedly at every junction where the road forked, the opportunity to choose differently, and who had chosen wrong every time with the consistency of someone who had mistaken the absence of consequences for the absence of cost. He reached for his radio. Bull stepped forward from the line of bikes and said, very quietly, "Don't." And something in the quality of that single word, not loud, not theatrical, the word of a man who has nothing left to perform and nothing left to prove and is simply stating a fact about what happens next, made Greer's hand stop. Grace Okafor's car came down the driveway. She got out before it had fully stopped, which told Ryder everything he needed to know about the 14 months she'd spent building toward this moment, and what she was willing to spend to close it. She was in her 40s, dark-coated, carrying a bag over one shoulder and a phone in her hand, and the expression of someone who had driven 40 minutes at speed through mountain rain and had arrived exactly as angry as the situation warranted, and not 1 degree more. She looked at Greer. She looked at the second man, Wota, who had, in the arriving headlights of her car, made the calculation that the thing at his side was no longer a viable option and had let it drop back and stepped away from it with the careful body language of someone trying to subtract themselves from a situation they could no longer control. "Deputy Greer," Okafor said, "I'm Grace Okafor, licensed attorney, and I represent Elizabeth Mercer. Do you have documentation of your warrant?" Greer looked at her. He looked at Ryder. He looked at the line of bikes and Bull and Cass and the other men standing in the rain with the patient, immovable quality of a wall that has decided it is a wall and is no longer interested in being argued with. He looked at the second man. The second man was already walking back to the vehicle. "Deputy," Okafor said again, "the warrant." Greer put his radio back on his belt. He got in his car. He sat there for 30 seconds with the engine running and the headlights pointing at the house. The last 30 seconds of a man who is losing something he had convinced himself was permanent, and then he backed down the driveway and the taillights disappeared into the dark and the rain. The second man's vehicle followed. The bikes idled. The rain fell. Bull let out a breath that had been in his chest since approximately the moment Greer's headlights had appeared at the mouth of the driveway. It came out long and slow and carried with it something that wasn't quite relief. Relief was for situations that were over, and this was not over. Not in any sense that mattered, but was the specific exhale of someone who has held a line and found the line held. Okafor was already at the door. Ryder let her in. What happened in the next 3 hours happened mostly in the front room of June's house, at the table where Tuck's laptop still sat open, around the organized stack of documents and drives and printed records that represented the accumulated evidence of a night that had begun as one girl's survival and had revealed itself to be the thread that unraveled something considerably larger. Okafor worked the way Ryder worked. No wasted motion, no performance, just the clean application of skill to problem in the flat, unromantic light of almost morning. She read everything. She asked specific questions. She made calls. At 6:14 a.m., she reached someone at the state AG's investigative office. Someone who picked up, which told Ryder that the office had been waiting for exactly this kind of call, that Pruitt's undercover work had been building toward a window that had now opened. At 7:03 a.m., Ryder's phone buzzed with a news alert from the Great Falls Tribune. Arthur Breck, Ridgeline County Commissioner, had been taken into custody by state investigators. Simultaneous warrant executions at Breck's Great Falls office and his home. Calvin Pruitt, identified in a related property conspiracy, was in custody in Harlan. Dale Greer had been intercepted on Route 9 by State Patrol before he'd made it back to Black Hollow. The machine had been running for 14 years. It took one night to find the thread and 4 hours to pull it. Wade Mercer was arrested at the farmhouse on Cutter's Ridge at 7:47 a.m. by state investigators accompanied by 2 county deputies from the next county over. Not Greer's county, not Greer's Reach. While the sun was coming up cold and pale over the Beartooth Range and the frost on the farmhouse windows was catching the light in a way that made the place look, briefly, like something it had never been. Ellie was not there when it happened. She was in June's kitchen, drinking actual hot coffee, sitting across from her Aunt Patricia, who had arrived at 6:30 with red eyes and a 3-hour drive's worth of grief worked through enough to sit at a table and hold her niece's hands without falling apart. Patricia was 53 and looked like Ellie's mother in the specific way that certain features migrate through families, the line of the jaw, the set of the eyes. And the first time Ellie had looked at her across the kitchen table, she'd had to look away, and then look back, and hold it. The way you held something that hurt, but was also true. They talked for a long time. Some of it was the practical architecture of what came next. The emergency custody filing Okafor had already initiated, the timeline of the state investigation, the question of school, and the question of where. Some of it was not practical at all. Some of it was just 2 people sitting in a kitchen in the early morning, both of them carrying a name they didn't say out loud, but that was present in everything they said, the way some losses work, the way they become the air of certain rooms. Patricia cried. Ellie didn't, not then. She held her aunt's hands and was steady in the way she had been steady all night, the hard, undecorated steadiness of someone who has been managing their own weight for so long that they don't know immediately how to set it down. The setting down came later. It came in the afternoon, in the passenger seat of Patricia's car, on the road south toward Billings, when the mountains were behind them and the road ahead was wide and straight and ordinary, and Patricia had the heat on and was playing something low on the radio that Ellie didn't know the name of. It came without announcement, just a moment when the accumulated weight of 6 years plus 1 night hit some threshold that the body had been maintaining below, and the steadiness gave way, not catastrophically but completely, in the specific way of something that has been held as long as it needed to be held and no longer needs to be held. Patricia drove. She didn't say anything. She put one hand on Ellie's shoulder and left it there and kept driving. That was enough. That was, it turned out, exactly enough. The emergency custody hearing was 8 days later. Okafor presented the medical documentation, the photographs, the property records, the clinic footage, the Hector Vane surveillance video, and the pattern of suppressed reports with the focused, unhurried precision of someone who has been waiting 14 months, really, 14 months plus however long the girls before Ellie had been waiting, for a room with the right people in it. The state investigator's office provided corroborating evidence from their own file. Dr. Vasquez testified by video from Harlan. Wade Mercer sat across the courtroom and looked at the evidence of his own construction being dismantled piece by piece and said nothing, which was the right choice, which was possibly the first right choice he had made in 14 years, and which came too late to matter. The judge granted permanent guardianship to Patricia Mercer. Wade was charged with aggravated assault, child endangerment, and conspiracy related to the Ridgeline land scheme. The investigation into Sarah Mercer's death was formally reopened by state homicide. Calvin Pruitt, in exchange for a reduced charge on the property conspiracy, confirmed that he had been on Route 12 on the morning of February 14th, 12 years ago, following instructions from Arthur Breck to ensure that Sarah Mercer did not reach the attorney's office in Harlan. The word the prosecutor used was not accident. Ellie was not in the courtroom when that confirmation was entered into the record. Okafor had advised against it, and Ellie, after a moment of considering whether she was making the choice for herself or performing strength for an audience that wasn't there, had agreed. She was in the hallway with Patricia. She heard, through the closed door, the sound of the proceeding continuing. She looked at the wall. She breathed. She held the truth of it, the full, complete, no longer hypothetical truth of what had happened on that road. And she let it be what it was, and she was still there on the other side of holding it, which was not nothing, which was in fact everything. 3 weeks later, snow fell on Black Hollow. It came in the night, the first real snow of the season, not the ice-edged rain of November, but actual snow, deep and soft, the kind that changed the acoustic quality of the world and made the morning feel like something new had been decided about the available conditions. By the time the sun was up, it was 4 inches deep on the county road and 6 on the mountains, and the valley held it the way the valley held everything, completely, without discrimination. Rosie's Diner opened at 7, the same as always. Dennis had the coffee on and the propane heater doing its clearing throat cycling and the fluorescent light above the pie case flickering with its reliable 45-second rhythm. And by 7:15 there were 4 motorcycles in the parking lot, which was not unusual, which was in fact so usual that Dennis had already started the second pot before the bell above the door chimed. Ryder came in first, then Bull, then Cass, and a fourth man she hadn't met before, who had the particular quality of someone recently returned from somewhere far away and still recalibrating to ordinary distances. They settled at the counter the way they settled anywhere, taking up exactly the space they needed and no more. The minimal, deliberate arrangement of people who had learned to coexist in close quarters without requiring the space to be something other than what it was. Dennis poured without being asked. The bell above the door chimed again at 7:42. Ellie Mercer came in from the snow. She was wearing a coat that fit properly, not oversized, not strategically selected for concealment, and her hair was different, shorter, the way hair was sometimes different, after a person had been somewhere that changed them and the body registered the change and wanted the surface to reflect it. She had a backpack over one shoulder, the ordinary school day kind. She scanned the diner the way she always scanned rooms, the automatic inventory, and then she caught the motion of it, acknowledged it, and let it go. Old habit, still useful, no longer the only thing available. She sat in the corner booth. She put her backpack on the seat beside her. She pulled out a textbook and a notebook and put them on the table, and Dennis appeared with a hot chocolate without being asked. And she looked up at him and said, "Thank you," without the careful flatness she'd used the last time, with something genuine and uncomplicated in it. Dennis nodded and disappeared. She opened the textbook. She wrote something in the notebook. She ate a cheeseburger when it arrived. She'd ordered it herself this time, without anyone arranging it for her. And she did homework over it in the particular absorbed way of someone who had decided that the ordinary machinery of a life was not a consolation prize, but was, in fact, the thing itself. At some point, she looked up and found Ryder looking at her from the counter, not watching the way she'd been watched before. Not the surveillance of threat assessment, not the watching that required her to be aware of being watched at all times. Just looking. The way someone looked at a person they were glad to see occupying a space they'd once been frightened to occupy. She looked back at him for a moment. "The coffee's still terrible," she said. "Yes," he said. "You're still drinking it." "I am." She looked back at her textbook. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something smaller and more durable than a smile. The expression of someone who has found, after a long search conducted mostly in the dark, a room that is warm enough and a counter with someone steady at it, and a window that shows, this morning, snow on mountains, and a sky going pale gold at the edges with the specific, unhurried light of a morning that intends to be ordinary. Outside, the 4 Harleys sat in the snow, patient, idling gently, not going anywhere yet. The exhaust curled up into the cold air and dissolved. The propane heater cycled on with its old man sound, and the light above the pie case flickered, and the coffee was genuinely, reliably terrible. Ryder drank it anyway, and the morning came in through the windows of Rosie's Diner, the way mornings came into places where people had survived something together and hadn't needed to name it to know what it was. Slowly, and with a quality of light that fell on everything equally, on the worn stools and the cracked counter, and the textbook open in the corner booth, and the 4 men with their scarred hands, and their iron patches, and their terrible coffee, and on the 17-year-old girl who had counted headlights in the dark for 6 years, and had finally, in the window of a diner in the snow, stopped counting. Not because the world had become safe, because she had stopped being alone in it.